always believed sibling love was unbreakable. You know? Something that withstood time, fights, adversity. My sister Charlotte and I grew up together in a small Nebraska town, sharing a room and our biggest ambitions. She was always the brightest, the boldest. While I was cautious and grounded, Charlotte seemed destined to conquer the world. Our parents weren't wealthy, but they taught us values we believed to be eternal: honesty, hard work, and family unity. Our father, a man of unwavering principles, ran a small business, and our mother dedicated herself to raising us with love and discipline. There was never plenty, but there was also never a lack of food on the table. And above all, there was never a lack of love. When our parents passed away, life began to change. First came sadness, the unbearable pain of losing both of them in such a short time. Then came the practical matters: the house, my father's small business, and the modest amount he had saved over the years. As the younger one, I trusted Charlotte to handle the paperwork. She was always so determined, so confident. I didn't question anything. But that's when everything began to crumble. One night, weeks after the funeral, Charlotte appeared at my house with a stack of papers. Her eyes held that cold glint I no longer recognized. She explained that to simplify the inventory process, we needed to sign some documents transferring the assets into a single name: hers. "It's temporary," she said, smiling as if telling the most innocent lie in the world. "This way we avoid unnecessary taxes and can divide everything later, without complications." For a moment I hesitated. Something inside me told me not to sign, but Charlotte was my sister, the person who had always looked out for me. What reason would she have to lie? I took the pen and signed. Months passed, and Charlotte's promises never materialized. Every time I asked about dividing the assets, she changed the subject. There was always a problem, a bureaucratic delay, something beyond our control. Until one day, I received an official letter that clarified everything. The house where we grew up, my father's business, and all the money had been legally transferred to her name. When I confronted her, what I heard was like a knife in my heart. "Do you think you can handle this, Maddie?" she said, her voice so cold I barely recognized it. "You barely manage your own accounts. I did this for everyone's good, but you'll never understand." The argument was one of the worst of my life. Charlotte, the person I loved most, was treating me like a stranger. Every word of hers was a cruel reminder that I had nothing left, not even the house where I spent my childhood, nor the resources to start over. I was completely alone. Gradually, the bonds between us frayed. I stopped answering her calls, stopped responding to her messages. She didn't make any effort to get closer, as if there was no remorse. To her, I seemed to be just an obstacle removed. During that time, my life became a blur of pain and anger. The nights were long, filled with thoughts of everything I could have done differently. I wondered how someone who shared the same childhood, the same memories, could be so cruel. But what hurt me the most was a question that never left my mind. At what point did she stop being my sister and become this strange, greedy person? While Charlotte seemed to prosper with the inheritance, traveling and showcasing a lifestyle we never had, I was struggling to survive. My job at the local coffee shop paid the bills, but there was barely any money left for emergencies. I remember looking at the future and seeing an endless void, without any prospect of improvement. That's when I realized that if I wanted a life, I would have to build it from scratch. Without Charlotte, without the security my family had left behind. Just me and my willpower. But at that moment there was no strength. Only the pain of a betrayal that seemed larger than the world. The last time I saw Charlotte before our complete separation, she was getting into a luxury car. Her clothes were expensive, her hair impeccable. I called out to her, but she didn't even look back. That's when something inside me broke forever. That night I wrote in my diary, "Forgiving is for the strong," they say. But today all I feel is weakness. Looking back, I realize that moment marked the end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. The chapter where I would have to learn to get back on my feet alone. But, as I said before, fate has strange ways of forcing us to confront our past. I thought I would never have to think about Charlotte again, that I could live my life away from her shadow. Little did I know that this story was far from over. Gradually, I began rebuilding my life. At first, it was a slow, almost imperceptible process. An extra shift here, an online class there. I worked at a coffee shop during the day, and spent nights trying to learn something that could give me a better chance in the job market. It was hard, but strangely, it was also liberating. For the first time, every small victory was just mine. Still, there were moments when loneliness crept in. You know, after a long journey, when you get home and have no one to share your small triumphs or defeats with. In those moments, I wondered if my life would have been different if my sister hadn't betrayed me. But I didn't allow myself to stay in that dark place for too long. I had learned the hard way that no one would come to save me. After 2 years of hard work, I managed to open my own business, a small second-hand shop. It was modest, but it was my first true accomplishment. I loved finding hidden treasures in flea markets, restoring them, and giving them a second chance. There was something therapeutic about this process, as if I was also restoring broken parts of myself. Charlotte? She was a ghost in my mind. She never contacted me again, and I forced myself not to think about her. Sometimes I heard rumors around town about her glamorous lifestyle. Parties, trips to Europe, expensive dinners. I didn't feel envy, only sadness. It was hard to reconcile that image with the girl who shared ice cream with me when we were little. Everything was going relatively well, until the day I received an unexpected message. "Can we talk? It's urgent." It was from her. My first reaction was to ignore it. My heart raced, and I felt the weight of all the years of resentment returning. Why would Charlotte be contacting me now, after everything that happened? But before I could delete the message, another one arrived. "Please, Maddie. I need you." There was something in that second message that made me hesitate. It wasn't typical of the confident, assertive Charlotte I knew. It was as if there was a cry for help embedded in those words. After a long day at the shop, I sat on the couch and stared at my phone for hours. I thought about everything she had done. I thought about how long it took me to recover, about the pain, the humiliation. And yet, something in me couldn't completely erase those messages. I decided I deserved to hear what she had to say. Not for her, but for me. I responded curtly. "I'll be at the coffee shop tomorrow at 2 p.m. If you don't show up, never contact me again." Everything started with bad investments. Jonathan and I wanted to multiply what we inherited, to ensure our children had everything they needed. But we made mistakes. I made mistakes. I was greedy, Maddie. I thought I could make the money grow fast, and I lost everything. When I realized what was happening, it was too late. "And you never thought to contact me before?" I asked, my voice sharp. She swallowed hard, avoiding my gaze. I was ashamed. I didn't know how to face you after what I did. For a moment I was silent. Part of me wanted to believe her, but another part knew forgiveness wouldn't be so simple. "Here's my second condition," I continued. "I won't do this for you. If I decide to help, it will be for your children. But don't think this means everything is okay between us." Charlotte nodded, visibly relieved, but also understanding the gravity of what I was saying. "I understand, Maddie. And I'm grateful, more than you can imagine." As she left, a part of me felt relieved for having set boundaries. But another part knew this decision would still bring complications I couldn't foresee. As I locked the doors of the thrift store that night, a question hammered at my mind. Is this truly a beginning of redemption, or just another trap of fate? The following weeks were intense. Charlotte started appearing frequently, updating me on Jonathan's condition and the challenges she was facing. I didn't know how to feel about it. On the one hand, it was strange to see her so open and vulnerable, almost like a desperate attempt at redemption. On the other hand, my mind constantly reminded me of the past, of the betrayal that had separated us. I decided to help in the way I could. I used what I had saved over the years to cover some of Jonathan's medication, and helped Charlotte contact a charity organization that could facilitate access to the treatment he needed. Despite everything, I set clear boundaries. My help was practical and objective, without emotional involvement. But Charlotte seemed determined to break these barriers. "Maddie, can I help you at the thrift store?" she asked one day when we met at the hospital. I stared at her, surprised by the offer. Charlotte had always been the type of person who avoided hard work, preferring to delegate tasks to others. Now she wanted to spend hours cleaning, cataloging, and organizing used clothes. "Why?" I asked, not hiding my distrust. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I want to make up for what I did." The sincerity in her voice was disconcerting, but something inside me prevented me from saying no. The following week, she appeared at the thrift store and started working alongside me. It was strange at first, almost uncomfortable. But gradually I noticed something different. Charlotte was no longer the woman I remembered. She was more humble, more willing to listen. She asked about every detail of my work, praised my dedication, and even tried to offer suggestions to attract more customers. One day, during a quiet afternoon, she looked at me and said, "You've built something amazing here, Maddie. I'm proud of you." For a moment, I felt a strange warmth in my chest. These were words I had always wanted to hear from her, but never thought I would. Still, I didn't know if I was ready to fully accept what seemed like a sincere effort at reconnection. Things became even more complicated when I met Jonathan and their children, Lila and Ryan, ages 10 and 7. Charlotte invited me to dinner at her house, insisting she wanted me to meet the family. Reluctantly, I accepted. When I arrived, the sight of the house was a shock. The luxury I had imagined had disappeared. Instead, I found a small, modest home, almost as simple as the apartment where I lived. The dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Jonathan, despite appearing frail due to his illness, was kind and grateful for my help. Lila and Ryan were lovely children, full of energy and questions about my thrift store. For a moment, I forgot all the resentment. Sitting at the table with them, laughing at the silly stories the children told, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a sense of family. But that peace lasted only a short time. A week later, while Charlotte was helping me at the thrift store, something happened that brought everything back to the surface. We were organizing boxes in the storage room when I found an old photo album I had taken from our parents' house years ago. Charlotte, curious, opened the album and started flipping through it. "I remember this," she said, pointing to a photo of us two on the backyard swing. "You cried so much when you fell from that swing. I thought it would never stop." I didn't respond. I just looked at the photo, memories flooding back. "Maddie," she began, closing the album. "I'm so sorry. For everything." I looked up at her, my chest tight. "You're so sorry?" I asked, my voice trembling. "That doesn't erase what you did, Charlotte. You destroyed everything. You left me with nothing." She took a deep breath, tears filling her eyes. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to fix it, even if you never forgive me." Her words hit me like a punch. For a moment I thought about everything I had built, how I was stronger now than ever. But I also thought about how all that hatred and resentment had consumed me for years. Charlotte's voice broke the silence again. "Maddie, I don't expect your forgiveness. I just want you to know that I love you. I've always loved you." She left the storage room, leaving me alone with my conflicting emotions. As I closed the thrift store that night, I sat at the counter looking at the photo album. Part of me wanted to leave the past behind, to make room for something new. But another part still carried the weight of the betrayal, the pain of being left behind. I knew I was facing a difficult choice. Continue carrying the weight of the past or give my sister a chance to show she could change. But was I ready for that? The following days were filled with quiet reflections. Charlotte continued helping at the thrift store, always respecting my limits. She no longer talked about the past, nor insisted on reopening wounds. Instead, she was present, trying to show with actions what perhaps she couldn't express in words. But I was still divided. Forgiveness wasn't something I knew how to do easily. The resentment was a deep scar, and no matter how hard I tried, it seemed impossible to ignore the past. It was during a quiet afternoon at the thrift store that things finally changed. A customer came in, and while Charlotte was organizing some shelves, he noticed the resemblance between us. "Are you sisters?" he asked, smiling. Charlotte remained silent, waiting for my answer. For the first time, I felt the weight of what that word meant. "We are," I finally replied, my voice calm but filled with meaning. Charlotte looked at me, surprised, but said nothing. It was just a moment, but something changed there. Perhaps it was the beginning of something new, or perhaps it was just the acceptance of what already was. Later that night, Charlotte called me for dinner again, but this time just the two of us. Reluctantly, I accepted. I thought it would be just another attempt for her to apologize, but what happened was different. Sitting in her simple kitchen, Charlotte began to talk about things she had never said before. "Maddie, I need you to know that when I did what I did, I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of not being enough. I thought money would solve everything, but it only destroyed what was most important. I listened in silence, feeling each word of hers like a weight on my chest. I lost myself, Maddie. And the worst part is that when I realized it, it was too late. I knew I had hurt you, but I didn't know how to fix it. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Pity for the person Charlotte had become and for the emptiness she must have carried all these years. Charlotte, you broke something I never thought could be broken. And I don't know if it can be fixed, I replied, my voice firm but without rancor. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know, but I'll keep trying. In that moment, I realized that despite everything, there was something powerful in the attempt. In the effort to rebuild, even if the chances of success were small. Time passed and things didn't go back to how they were before, but something new began to grow. Charlotte was committed to change, and I, little by little, allowed myself to believe that this was possible. Jonathan received the transplant he needed, and Charlotte managed to regain a stable life for her family. I continued focused on my thrift store, but for the first time in years, I felt there was room for something more. One day, while we were working together, she handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked, curious. It's not much, but it's a start. I opened the envelope and saw a check. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was significant. It's part of what I took from you. I want to give it all back, Maddie. It will take time, but I will pay every penny. The sincerity in her eyes was enough to convince me she was serious. I held the check for a moment before putting it away in the counter drawer. Thank you, Charlotte. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time that smile seemed genuine. What I learned throughout this journey is that forgiveness isn't a gift we give to others, but a liberation we give to ourselves. Forgiving Charlotte didn't mean forgetting what she did, but it meant ceasing to carry the weight of resentment. It meant making room for a new beginning, even if imperfect. My sister stole my millionaire fiancé, but 15 years later when he saw my husband he was shocked. And if you, like me, have faced family conflicts and found yourself caught between the pain of the past and the hope of a better future, I want to share something that might help you. My ebook, Dealing with Family Secrets and Resentments, A Guide to Overcoming Conflict, is a practical and emotional tool for those seeking to understand and overcome the challenges of family relationships. In it you will find strategies for dealing with deep resentments, exercises to restore trust, tips for building new connections, even in difficult situations. Click the link below to learn more and begin your healing journey today. You deserve this peace.
Hi, you are on the Moving Narratives channel. Subscribe and follow our stories.